So we're covering chapters 3 and 4 in the book, and in this short video, we're going to go through the technical processes of capturing an image, how we capture the image in the camera, quantizing, which is basically turning an image into digital signals, the different camera angles through the lens, captured through the lens, how the lens captures light, that's the iris portion, beam splitting, which happens in the camera, and then the camera chain, what kinds of devices we need to connect to the camera so that it can capture images. So first is your screen is made up of pixels, right? And different types of screens have different kinds of configuration for pixels. But basically you have a red pixel, a green pixel, and a blue pixels on your screen, and they light up in different quantities, right? And produce all the images, the color images that you see on your screen. These are additive colors. So like you can take two colors and mix them a certain way to get a third color, like to get a yellow or to get a purple or something like that, just different configurations of the RGB, all right? Now we have different kinds of ways these pixels light up, and that is that there is a scan that happens onto these pixels. So imagine, if you will, let's take a look at the old CRT screens. Basically, it's a picture tube, right? And there's a gun in the back that has light, and it shoots this light towards the front of the screen, and that lights up the pixel. All right, and that beam of light has to scan. Now in our flat screens, it does the same thing, although it's just kind of jammed together like that, right? Progressive scans is kind of what we have now, that scans from the top left in order and in order. So it scans those pixels in order from the top left to the bottom of the screen. And it produces one frame, and the number of frames per second, or FPS, is sometimes called the refresh rate. Okay, how many frames do you get per second, or how many times is that screen refreshed per second? The old CRTs had an interlace scan instead of a progressive scan. And so what the beam of light did, it would scan the odd numbered lines from top left in order, and go down to the bottom, and then go back up to the top and scan the even numbered lines from the top, and then go down to the bottom. All right. And so it took two fields. Each of these scans, the odd scans was a field, the even scan was a field, and you had to complete two of these scans, two of these fields, to get the whole picture. And it's used for low bandwidth and CRTs, things like that, you know, the cathode ray tubes, the old tube technology. Now we have different kinds of resolutions and different sizes on our screens, right? And the more pixels that you have, the more resolution you're going to get. The bigger you can make the screen, but also the more defined your image becomes and the clearer your image becomes. So you can see on the bottom there, we have a measurement in pixels of the standard. The bottom one is a standard definition TV, the old tube TV, right? And it had a pixels of 640 pixels by 480 pixels for a pixel count of around 300,000 pixels, right? Then we get into our high definition televisions, and they have maybe three times the amount of pixels as the standard definition TV. And then we get full HD TV, which has even more, and then we get 4K and then 8K transmission. So these are the resolutions of different video formats. The more pixels, the better, right? Now, we take our signal and take it and convert it from what they call an analog signal into a digital signal. And basically you're taking a wave, and that's what we have there on the top. We have a wave of let's say that is the analog signal, the electronic signal of a picture, right? And we take that wave And in our CRT, in our old standard def televisions, we're processing that. But in our digital televisions, what we're doing is that we're quantizing it. All right. And so we're taking this analog signal and we are sampling it. And that's what the A section of that wave is going through. We're taking little snapshots of that signal. And there's many samples per second. So during a second, we're taking little snapshots of the voltage of that signal, right? And this is the quantizing that's going on, right? And a low digital sampling rate gives you a lot of loss of signal. That's what you've got B. In B, we don't have as many samples per second, right? But in the A frame, you can see that there's many more samples per second. So your quantizing is not only made up of how many samples, it's the sample rate, how many samples you're taking per second, but also the resolution of those samples. How many digital bits of information make up each sample? All right, and that's what is known as the bit depth. Okay, more on that, much more on that later when we get into audio. But basically, we're taking our analog signal. The quantizing process is the process of making it into a digital file. So lenses are classified by their focal length and their width of view. And we have a thing called a zoom lens, right? And really what that is a variable length of variable focal length of view. So in the old days of television cameras, we had multiple lenses on a turret of a camera because we had only one focal length on each one of those lenses, and we had to switch between them. And then they devised, well, let's do a zoom lens, and now we can use just one lens and we can figure out our focal length. These are the basic camera parts, by the way. You have your object, what we're looking at. It goes through the light, goes through the lens, right, and gets focused onto a place called the beam splitter. More on the beam splitter. Goes through a charged coupling device, which interprets the signal into an electronic signal, right? And then it goes through amplification and processing outside the camera. And of course, we have a viewfinder for the operator to operate our camera. So we have these zoom lenses that are multiple focal lengths. And you might have heard people talking about narrow angles and wide angles. And that's what we have here. In the image on the left, that's a wide angle image. And that's like that red angled image from the camera you see in the middle, right? The wide angle gives us more of the field of view. And then the narrow angle is like what we get when we zoom in on the zoom lens, all right? And the angle refers to the angle of the picture edge relative to the lens. So the wide angle means that we have a wider field of view. A narrower angle means that we have a narrower field of view, but it seems to give us a field of view that is zoomed in, all right? And then light, of course, is coming into the camera through the lens, and we adjust the amount of light that comes into the camera with an iris, right? Much like you have in your eye, you have this little device in the camera that lets the amount of light in, right? And the iris controls the amount of light that enters through the lens, and that can be controlled at a place called the CCU, the camera control unit. Camera control units for our studio are located in the master control area. To the left of the server's position, all right? And we can mess with the CCU and mess with the irises, and you can see how it lets an amount of light in, or not. And you can see on the illustration there that the large opening, it goes from large opening, letting in a lot of light, to a smaller opening, giving us less light. And you also, the depth of field refers to how much of the image is going to be in focus. A large depth of field might be from here to here is in focus, and a shallow depth of field might be like, well, now we're only going to have this much in focus, right? That's a shallower depth of field, right? And that, the iris helps us control the depth of field. On the bottom right is a CCU, and our CCU looks similar to that too. And we can mess with it during lab and show you how we can adjust the iris on that. Now, in our camera is a series of prisms, all right, and filters that split the light into 3 primary colors. Because remember, we need to get those pixels going, right? And so we need to split it into red, blue, and green beams, right? And then the charge coupling device, the CCD, transduces that light energy into electricity. So you have a red channel, and you have a green channel, and you have a blue channel. Each one of those is picking up their specific colored beam, and that CCD is taking that light beam and turning it into electricity, all right? And outside of the camera, or outside of the beam splitter, we have the camera chain that consists of the power supply, sync generator, and the CCR, the camera control unit for the camera. So our camera, once we've got the beam split, it goes to the CCU is the device that controls the iris, control the depth of field, those sort of things. But also that image is going back to the CCU and eventually goes out to the recorders, right, or the transmitters. Now, in tandem with the CCU, you of course need a power supply. So the power supply is generating power for the CCU, but also for the camera head being what is mounted on the pedestal, right? And then there's also a sync generator. Imagine this, okay? You have this scan going on on your TV, right? But you also have this scan going on in the camera and in the viewfinder, all right? So it's always doing this kind of progressive scan, or in the old days, an interlace scan, right? Well, they need to be in sync, right? And if they're not in sync, then you get things like picture roll, and you get all sorts of different anomalies in your picture. And think about this too. Your camera has to be in sync with internally, but if you're running another camera with it, and we're running 3 cameras in the studio, those cameras have to be in sync. All right. So their beams have to be at precisely the same point on each camera at the same time. They have to be at the same point in the scan, in that progressive scan. And so do the pictures, so do the monitors. All right. So everything has to be in sync, and that happens with a sync generator. And if you're not in sync, then you get picture roll and all sorts of crazy things that can happen there too. Okay. Well, that is our very short lecture on the imaging process. Make sure you go and read chapters 3 and 4, and then take the quiz when you're ready.